Great, Jason. Thank you so much, and thank you for everyone for being here today and for taking time out of your busy schedules to talk about some things to think about when moving to LTE-M. We know that there's a lot of interest around this topic and a lot of benefits, but there are a lot of key things to consider when looking at this new technology and how it's going to be right for your connected devices. So hopefully today we can uncover some of those hidden challenges and get you thinking about some solutions that are going to help maximize the overall success of your LTE-M deployment. So before we jump in really quickly, I just wanted to give a quick overview of Aeris for those of you who don't know who we are, and give a little background or context as to why I'm here talking to you guys today. We are an IoT solutions provider. We have a couple different offerings today, but historically and what our primary focus is in providing cellular connectivity to companies building IoT deployments across all IoT verticals. Our headquarters are here in San Jose, California, but we do have offices globally as well as network operation centers globally. About 350 people today, heavily focused on the engineering side. We're a company that prioritizes in creating innovative solutions around the areas where we provide IoT offerings. But again, we're really focused on being a cellular connectivity provider for IoT solutions, and today support over 14 million connected devices on our cellular networks globally. So again, just a little bit of context as to why I'm here talking to you today. Cellular connectivity for IoT devices is what we do as a company. It's what I focus on every day. And so hopefully today I can answer some questions for you again, because this is something that we at Aeris are thinking about constantly. So jumping in and kind of centering the conversation around LTE-M, we know that there are a lot of key benefits to this new technology, and I'm making the assumption that the majority of you are familiar with LTE-M. Otherwise, I would assume you probably wouldn't be here today. But new technology coming out, cellular-based, that's geared towards IoT devices, and has a lot of key benefits to IoT solutions that previously really enjoyed the slow data speeds and the cheap module costs of 2G networks that are starting to be shut down globally in favor of the more high horsepower LTE networks for consumer phones. LTE-M is a new response to carve out some spectrum on the cellular networks for for IoT devices, and these kind of simplified, slower devices. Slower networks are going to enable really a couple key benefits for IoT devices, mainly around module cost. The module costs are dropping significantly versus LTE devices, getting closer to the 2G, 3G levels, especially the 2G levels, but not quite there just yet, but dropping below $10 in volume per module. They also introduce the ability to have a longer battery life. Devices can, under the right conditions, be deployed out in the field on LTE-M for over 10 years, and we're going to cover that a little bit, what that means under the right conditions and what some of the challenges around that are. And then lastly, better indoor signal penetration. At a lower frequency, this signal does do a better job penetrating indoors when compared to LTE, for example. So devices that do need to be indoors and still receive a cellular signal, vending machines, home healthcare devices, things like that. Better indoor signal penetration coming from the new LTE-M network compared to LTE, for example. And there are a couple known limitations as well. One of the things that drives the lower module costs and the longer battery life is that the networks only support so much throughput. They are really slower networks geared for devices that are going to be transmitting information periodically, smaller amounts of data, smaller data sessions, things like that. Which means that LTE-M is not right for all IoT applications. An easy way to think about it is sensors versus streaming. Sensors on a tank that are going to wake up and send small bits of information. LTE-M is a perfect fit for those devices. High definition security cameras that need to be streaming, gigabytes of data. LTE-M is not going to be the right network for those solutions. And so figuring out, is this the right technology for my usage or, for my device and my usage profile? LTE-M is not an end-all be-all network for all IoT devices. It's really geared towards the low usage sensor type devices. And then lastly, LTE-M is still new, still getting deployed, and depending on where you are in the world, the networks are in place or not. And so exist today a lot of coverage holes that we're going to spend some more time talking through how to navigate some of those short-term challenges. But key takeaways that this is a new technology. It's just getting rolled out. And until that, the network providers deploy these networks globally, there are going to be coverage holes. And so when we look at especially the known limitations, obviously the known benefits are attractive, and that's why many of you are interested in LTE-M, but the known limitations that become the hurdles to figure out how to jump over. And specifically, these limitations can cause some significant challenges as you look to build out not just your solution, but the management processes around your solution and how you're going to enable yourself to scale to tens and hundreds of thousands, and how you're going to manage those effectively once they're out in the field. And those challenges are going to be in kind of three key buckets that we're going to focus on for the rest of this conversation today. The first, as I mentioned, is coverage. How you navigate some of the short-term coverage holes. When can you expect that long-term that the coverage holes will be filled? What are some of the options you have to take advantage of the benefits of this technology now? And what are the things you should be thinking about to solve some of the coverage challenges? The next thing we're going to talk about is how you tweak your devices, or how you set them up so that they can have the longest possible battery life to get you to that 10-year mark, for example. What are some of the best practices you can be thinking about? And more importantly, what are some of the potentially not thought of side effects that are going to arise from making the changes to ensure battery life? We're going to get into that in a bigger way here, but it's going to mean different application usage profiles, different call flows, different behavior that may look unfamiliar to your operations team. So how do you keep track of that as you grow and scale and support these devices? And then lastly is around the network limitations. I had mentioned the throughput limitations on LTE-M. It's a smaller pipe that many devices are going to be competing to pipe of spectrum, that many devices are going to be competing to send information through. How do you know if devices are going to be experiencing network congestion issues because of these limitations? And what does that look like in a case where you're trying to send down a remote update to a device, which is where the big issue is going to be. So we're going to talk a lot about these three key challenges, what's causing the challenges, but more importantly, what you can do about them today and what you should be thinking about. So, hopefully that's in line with what you came looking to learn more about today. I'm certainly excited to jump into it all. The first area of challenges, the first potential pitfall that we want to talk about is around coverage. And so, what I'm going to do is talk about what are the key challenges around coverage today with LTE-M, and then get into what are the solutions that you can look at to avoid coverage being a major issue for your devices. And so really the challenges that I kind of touched on, but really want to expand on and spend some more time talking through, center around the fact that LTE-M is a very young network. And as you can imagine, here in the United States, for example, the big four networks that are here, Verizon, AT&T, Sprint, and T-Mobile, they own quite a few cell towers. Any cellular operator is going to own quite a few cell towers, especially when they're covering a very large geographic area. And while LTE-M is a software upgrade to existing LTE towers, it is still an upgrade that needs to happen. It does not happen overnight. In the United States, we're much further along. LTE-M networks are deployed nationwide with AT&T, with Sprint, and Verizon. T-Mobile had gone NB-IoT first, but is going to be looking at LTE-M eventually. So those networks are in place today, and by and large at LTE coverage levels, which makes deployments in the United States much easier. As you go look to the rest of the world, though, networks are not as advanced, and many carriers around the world, it's kind of country and region specific, but they're moving at different paces. And so it does not, these networks don't get turned on overnight. The coverage doesn't just automatically appear. There is work that the providers need to do, again, to upgrade their existing LTE towers. And many carriers globally are just at the beginning stages of getting that mapped out and getting that executed. So coverage holes on native networks do exist today. The second challenge is that today, roaming on LTE-M does not exist the same way that it does on other technologies. Especially looking back for those of you who've had experience with 2G networks globally, single global roaming networks, single SIM cards that could roam globally, did a good job of addressing global coverage because those underlying roaming agreements were there between the different operators around the world. Even within a given country, there has been more roaming historically enabled. As you look to LTE-M, the roaming is not as seamless today. The roaming agreements between some of the large networks, even in the US, for example, are not in place. So for devices that are looking to get a patchwork or a multi-layered coverage footprint, which, as we'll get into, is very important, especially for fixed IoT devices, meaning they are not moving around. It's very important to have multiple coverage access in case a device is in a location where it can't get its home signal, a strong enough signal to communicate there. So IoT devices have historically relied on roaming capabilities to get the coverage footprint that they need. Again, keeping in mind that IoT devices aren't smart enough to say, looks like I don't have a strong signal here on this street corner, let me walk a block down the street or call back later, as you and I do with our cell phones. So because the roaming isn't widespread today, it's not seamless, that does have a short-term impact on IoT connectivity, but it is improving. The roaming agreements are getting there. And it is something that over the next 12 months we should see improve. The last is around carrier fragmentation. I just kind of alluded to this, where many carriers around the world are moving at different speeds as it relates to their LTE M network rollouts. Not only are they moving at different speeds, but they are moving in different directions. Eventually, LTE M and NB-IoT are very complementary networks for IoT devices. Think of NB-IoT as an even slower network built for even smaller, dumber sensors and even lower cost modules there. So less network throughput available to NB-IoT, even compared to LTE M, but great for the really, really dumb sensors. And so some carriers have prioritized moving ahead with one over the other. Here in the U.S., most of the carriers picked LTE M and have now deployed NB-IoT or are about to. T-Mobile being the exception that they did NB-IoT first, and we'll get to LTE M eventually. But that's a good example because as we look to other parts of the world, in Europe especially, by number, the more countries actually went NB-IoT first and will then get to LTE M. But high degree of fragmentation globally, with many carriers moving at different speeds. So what we don't have, the impact here is that from a single seamless global coverage perspective, we don't have a single LTE M global coverage footprint that covers everywhere we have cell towers today across the world, much like we do with 2G, 3G, and by and large LTE. So that lack of, that initial fragmentation then creates additional coverage holes because even where a carrier has picked NB-IoT or LTE M, maybe they picked NB-IoT, not LTE M. So for those looking to deploy globally, it introduces a new set of challenges. So with those challenges in mind, then what can you be thinking about today if you really want to take advantage of the cost and the battery benefits of LTE M? And so first, you really need to separate it out into two categories. There is the U.S. deployments and then global deployments. So for U.S. deployments, what you really want to look for is, even though many carriers have deployed LTE M nationwide and those coverage footprints, the maps look nice, again, especially for fixed devices, a single layer coverage footprint may cause problems. If a device is on the wrong side of a building in a fringe coverage area, if it's underground, if it's in a building, and one carrier has better signal penetration than another, if the device if the network your device is connecting to is the one that doesn't have that strong signal, that can cause some problems that are very hard to navigate around because in most cases there is no fallback to a 2G network. Certainly no fallback to an LTE network because that would just make the modules even more expensive like LTE modules and kind of defeats the purpose of LTE M. So looking to find how to patch together multiple networks. How we're addressing that problem now is that we do have a multi-layered coverage offering in the United States where we can provide two tier 1 networks on a single SIM card with access to both networks so that we can layer those on top of each other, and then if a device is having coverage issues, be able to leverage both or the strongest depending on where it is. So finding multiple LTE network access on a single SIM card so that you don't have to manage multiple devices within a given country, multiple SKUs is what I mean, different part numbers in your inventory. Being able to have that on a single device is going to go a long way in creating the most seamless coverage experience for your devices. That same concept globally applies, although, again, more difficult because of the fragmentation that I had just gone through, but also easier to navigate around because one thing that's working for global deployments is the presence of 2G networks for at least the next 5 to 6 years. In Europe, we expect most 2G networks to be around through at least 2025, most parts of the rest of the world even longer. So what you can do is if you deploy a device that has an LTE M module with 2G fallback on a SIM card that can support both networks, that way when your devices are deployed, they can leverage the 2G networks while they are in place today, while also being LTE M capable so that when that network gets deployed in the future, they can automatically take advantage of that network, automatically effectively upgrade that connection to LTE M without having to do anything to the device physically or over the air, anything like that. That will all happen automatically if you pick the module that has those capabilities up front. So again, two different options to think about how to go about solving some of these coverage holes. Use the 2G fallback globally where you can. Look for providers that can give you multiple network access in the United States to provide a layered coverage footprint to solve some of those near-term coverage challenges that should get fixed over time, but probably not for the next 18 to 24 months in terms of getting to LTE levels of coverage that we see today. So that's it for the coverage discussion. One of the key things to think about with LTE M devices is we know that LTE M does offer better battery life, but in most of the marketing materials you'll read, whether it's hardware providers, network providers, anybody, the 3GPP standards, all of that, it all comes with the caveat that that's under the right circumstances. The reality is because LTE M does enable longer battery life because it draws less power because it's going to be doing less on the network. Keep in mind, these are much slower networks in terms of the amount of throughput that they provide. Again, why LTE M is good for sensors and low usage devices. When I say low usage, it really depends more on the type of application behavior, but probably in the 10 to 15 megabyte per month range or less, especially once you get into the sub 5 megabytes per month range. Anything more than that, you'll probably need the higher throughput of LTE, but because these devices are not able to send as much information, obviously then they're going to be sending less data. The next, though, is that LTE M enables the devices to go into a power-saving mode where they can effectively be asleep but still on the network when they are not actively sending information. So not spending batteries power maintaining a connection or searching for signal and things like that. They go into this power state sleep mode more often. That is, however, if you design them to do that. So the power saving isn't necessarily guaranteed. Applications, devices, the solution builders, you're going to have to keep this in mind. If battery life is a very, very critical component to your solution, to your value prop, to your customers, you're going to need to tweak the application behavior, design the call flows so that devices are only doing what they need to on the network and they are able to maximize their battery life. So what this can really do is, especially for those of you that are coming from deployments on a previous technology, 2G, 3G, potentially even LTE, where you had maybe, you had built around a different battery life expectation, so the application behavior was different. Maybe they were sending more, maybe they were maintaining sessions longer, maybe it could be lots of different factors, but the reality is with LTE M, you may have a whole new set of expected device behavior that is different from what you and your support and operations teams are used to. And so introducing a new set of devices, a new set of behavior, how do you then know that you are catching potential issues, catching potential overage or additional activity issues that are going to drain battery life? How do you know, especially in the first couple months of your deployment, where the reality is you're going to learn things about your devices that you didn't necessarily think through, or maybe you missed or expected it to go differently as part of your testing. You're going to put these devices out in the field and start to see how they're actually working and start to see what you need to learn and tweak and how you need to optimize. But that can only come with real-time visibility into both the device and the network activity. Understanding what devices are doing immediately and not relying on roaming records or 48-hour plus delays in the information getting into the platform. You need that information right away. You need the granular detail to know exactly when a device registers on the network, when it starts a session, how long it maintained that session, how many bytes were sent to the device, how many bytes were sent from the device. All of that needs to come into your team immediately so you can see the real-time information of what devices are doing on the network. You can understand the new device behavior, what you're actually seeing in the field, be able to compare that to what you expected things to be as you put them out there, and then update your operational processes accordingly. And if they're, if it's a potential long-term issue where the devices are sending so much more data than they're supposed to, or they are registering and starting sessions many more times than you expected them to, if you do need battery life, for example, that could be a problem. You want to get that fixed right away. If they are sending more data than they're supposed to, that's ultimately going to become an overage, a connectivity overage problem. If you're exceeding your rate plan allotments, for example, you want to catch that right away. And you need that information, especially up front, to understand what's going on as quickly as possible. We have our own core network. Effectively, we own and operate everything but the cell towers themselves. That gives us the ability to feed that information to our customers around exactly what devices are doing in real time, especially in the design, the launch, the scale phase, which, as we saw, most of you guys are in. It's a very, very important set of information that's really needed to optimize the deployment early so that you can set things up for long-term growth down the road. Catching these problems early, understanding this device behavior, feeding that information faster to your operations team so that they can better identify what's going on with these new devices, the new behavior, all of that. It can be very tricky if you don't have the right set of operational tools. And we've been able to build out our core network to to deliver those capabilities through our platform, really geared towards providing that level of insight, that level of control, so that solutions can be optimized and ultimately costs can be lowered long term. So again, the key takeaway here is the new battery optimization of LTE M. It's going to change things, and whether you're used to managing devices in the past or you're new to it for the first time, you're going to need more information faster so that you can better understand and better pivot when needed to optimize your solution, your processes, and then ultimately drive towards what you need to, which is a lower operational cost of these deployments to then maximize your profit as you sell these things out in your market. This category, this potential pitfall, this last one we're going to cover today is really, it's around network limitations, but specifically around network congestion, and specifically around what that means for remote update specifically, because what we see is that these new technologies, as we've covered and said many, many times today, they are low bandwidth technologies, right? They're the slow lane on the highway that's been carved out for IoT devices, which is perfect for most IoT devices. The sensors, for example, they don't need to be able to send a whole lot of information, and they don't necessarily need it to be at the same speeds that us consumers and our smartphones need. So LTE M and NB-IoT are designed to have lower throughput. They're designed to limit the amount of data a device can send and the speeds at which it can send it. What this means, though, is that ultimately it's a smaller pipe of spectrum that the devices are going to be competing for. And so network congestion is going to be a larger issue for LTE M and NB-IoT than we have seen, for example, with LTE. Now, when I say network congestion, I don't necessarily mean for any of us who have been at a large gathering, a concert, a sporting event, whatever else it might be. It can be very hard to use our phones because there's so many people competing for access to those cell towers at the exact same time. In any scenario where there is an overload of devices talking to any given tower, that's going to happen. But when I talk about network congestion for the purposes of this discussion and its big impact to LTE M and IoT devices, it's not around the northbound connectivity, meaning the device sending information up to the network to eventually the back-end server, cloud, wherever it needs to go. I'm really talking more about this, in largely before I actually change subjects there, I'm not talking about the northbound communication because the majority of LTE M devices are going to be sending such small amounts of data that as long as they can connect to the tower, they'll be able to get that through. They're not looking to go in and hog a significant chunk of that. They're just looking to go send, here's my reading, here's my GPS location, here's my small amounts of data, whatever it might be. When I talk about congestion, I'm really talking more about the southbound, the remote updates, the information that you need to push down to the device, because that aspect is actually designed, it's very limited with the network rollouts. These are standardized technologies, and they have been designed to only allow so much simultaneous download activity at the exact same time. What we've seen so far is that anywhere from any given cell tower is going to be limited to facilitating or enabling anywhere between 25 to 50 simultaneous downloads at any given time. Additionally, the LTE M network only carves out a small amount of spectrum to be able to push down those updates. So you have 25 to 50 devices competing for an even smaller chunk of access on that cell tower. The reason that this matters for LTE M and NB-IoT is that they are deployed as half duplex, meaning the devices can only either send information or they can receive information. They cannot do both simultaneously. That's another reason of how they're able to get better battery life and why the modules are cheaper. But when looking at, you've got a bunch of devices theoretically talking to the same cell tower, and there's only a certain window of space that the downloads are able to take, the devices are going to compete for that download space, and it's going to cause problems in terms of a device actually being able to get its update, receive it, and actually take it into effect. So when you look at what that means from a management perspective, managing the updates, you've designed it, you've uploaded the firmware, the configuration, the software patch, whatever it is that you need to send down, and you're going to send that down to your devices, you're going to increase a much higher failure rate, or you're going to experience a much higher failure rate than you had with previous technologies, even in the 2G, 3G space. High failure rates means more retries. More retries means higher costs, whether that be network overage costs where the packet got half downloaded and had to restart, or whether that means that your operations team has to start manually tracking which devices were updated, which ones were not. The device may seem like because it just transmitted data, it's going to be able to receive that update. In reality, we've already seen in initial testing, this could be a big problem, especially imagine the use case where many companies sell through distribution channels. And if whether it's a GPS tracker or some other device that's waiting to be installed, if there are 100, 200 devices at any given location and you need to send down an update to those, if they're sitting in a warehouse, for example, they may all be competing for that same cell tower. And if you click send and try to update all at the exact same time, you're going to have a whole lot of failure rate, a high failure rate, and you're going to have to retry and figure out which devices did it go through to the update, which ones did it not, which ones do I need to try again, and when should I try again. The network congestion aspect of these LTE M networks is going to create significant challenges with this regard especially. So we had just touched on or introduced a couple of the ways that some companies are looking to build this out. I'm excluding the last option of not doing it because really devices that are being built now are going to have remote update capabilities. In fact, for those of you that have started to look into some of the recent legislation around security for IoT devices, there's a bill going through the state of California right now. One of the requirements, and it's all around cybersecurity for IoT devices, one of the requirements is the ability to send down a remote update. If you realize a security flaw, if you see that there's something that needs to be fixed, you have to design in the capabilities to send that down. And this is for anybody that wants to sell a device inside the state of California. There are 5 or 6 other examples of almost word-for-word identical legislation going through other states in the country, as well as a bill going through at the federal level in Washington that touches on a lot of the same things. So companies are, you're going to be forced to have the ability to do remote updates. There are a lot of other benefits to this ability, and so you're going to want to design that in. For example, you can add features on the fly, prevent obsolescence of your devices, get feedback from your customers, implement that feedback, continue to grow without having to replace those devices physically. So a couple options you have to implement this are, you can build your own homegrown tools and processes around the ability to send a remote update down to a device. Great, because by the end of it, if you do it right, you're going to have the perfect set of tools that is exactly what you need and nothing that you don't. The problem is that that's going to require a whole lot of development effort and cost and resources on your side to be able to do that. Not everybody can, especially those of you who are looking to get out the door, who are looking to launch a solution, looking to grow it. You may not have extra resources lying around to go build this out. So you may want to look to get something off the shelf from somebody else. And so option two, getting software from third parties that can help you do this. It's great. It's built for you. You don't have to do it. It can be automated with the right pieces. An example is many hardware manufacturers will provide, as part of their device management capabilities, the ability to send down remote updates, which is great as long as you're using their hardware and their hardware only. If you ever wanted to introduce a second device, eventually build your own once you scale, or look to get something that maybe a competitive device has some additional features that you want, you then have to go build a new set of processes around those new devices. And then you're looking at, if you want to send an update down to your entire fleet of devices, you got to go through different channels to do it. So it can create a lot of then challenges down the road that can be costly to navigate. The last is that those aren't necessarily going to include one of the key pieces that we just talked about, which is the network connectivity awareness. What's going on at the network level? Are the devices congested? What cell towers are they talking to? How do I know that even if I click send right now, that it's actually the device is in a network state and in a spot where it's ready to receive that update, and it's got a high likelihood of receiving that update? Which is exactly why we are building out connectivity awareness into our OTA, over-the-air remote update management platform, an extension of our connectivity management platform, available either through APIs or with the full front-end software, where we take that network connectivity information and we use that to identify when a device is most ready to receive an update. So whether the device, we use the real-time information to see, is the device registered? Is it in a session? Is it sending information? Is it not sending information? Has it torn down the session? Is it powered off? What is it doing on the network? To better understand and identify what's the profile based on your specific devices, what's the profile and the set of factors that creates the perfect time to send down that update based on what your device is doing on the network. The next is to pull in the network information. What cell tower is the device talking to? How many other of your devices are talking to that same cell tower? How many other devices on the Aeris network do we see are talking to that same cell tower? Do we expect that there's going to be network congestion there? And for those that come back to say, based on the network parameters, we think there's going to be congestion. Based on the device parameters, we think it's not ready to receive the update. Feed that back into the front-end management software to then automate the retries, figure out when it's going to be best to send down that update, execute that update, track the success rates, track the failures, and then automate the retries on those devices that did not go through. The idea here is that there's a lot of intelligence to be gathered from how devices communicate on the network, and a lot of network metadata that can be leveraged to improve processes and ultimately reduce operational costs on your side, preventing potential duplicate overcharges, preventing the requirement of having to pay someone to monitor, track, manually update. It can go much smoother if you're using intelligence at the network level to navigate these congestion issues, because they will be real for LTM. They're going to get worse for NB-IoT if that's on your roadmap of technologies that you're interested in. And leveraging information about when a device is ready to receive an update, when's the best time to do it, is ultimately going to increase the efficiency of your program, increase those success rates, and get the job done faster and cheaper for you. Again, by leveraging that connectivity awareness. So just to recap before we get into your questions, there are three really potential pitfalls that we see when deploying an LTM solution. The first is around coverage, how to navigate the coverage holes today, and what the obvious negative side effects there are your devices can't connect. So what can you do to avoid that? The answer is to look for multi-network access, and whether that's multiple network provider, layering two LTM signals on a single SIM card, which is possible here in the United States, or looking to leverage fallback to 2G networks for that better coverage globally while those networks are still in place, while they're still a viable option until the networks do get shut down in the next 5 to 10 years. But then deploy the devices so that they're ready to take over connecting to LTM once those networks are in place, well before those 2G shutdowns. The second pitfall is around the problems with managing devices around, with new application behavior, new call flows, again, in response to trying to get the best battery life possible for your devices. they're going to look different on the network with LTE-M. That's how LTE-M is able to offer better battery life, is by changing the way and the frequency that they communicate on the network. So how do you understand that information in real time, understand the trends, be able to make the tweaks that you need to early on in your deployment so that you can optimize, grow, and fine-tune that product out in the field for a better end-user experience for your customers and a lower operational cost for you. Then the last is around the challenges of the network limitations and the potential pitfalls of being stuck with an inefficient system of managing remote updates, mixed with the requirement of having to send down remote updates and the costs that are associated with that. Because of the network congestion, it's going to become a challenge even more so than previous technologies. And so leveraging connectivity network information to better identify which are the devices that are ready to go, and to apply automation software on top of that to increase the efficiency of your overall program can go a long way in reducing the connectivity and operational costs of your remote updates, which again can be a significant problem if not designed around properly. So thank you so much for taking the time to listen to that today. I really hope that it was useful information. And if you ever have any questions, feel free to reach out to us as a company. We'd be happy to answer those.